In 2010, Hollywood controlled 90% of the global box office. 14 years later, that number dropped to 70%. But here's what's really shocking. In India, Hollywood's market share collapsed from over 50% to just 8% in 2024. In Los Angeles, 40,000 entertainment jobs vanished since 2022. Film production in LA hit record lows. The factories that once churned out dreams are now silent. And the most disturbing part? Hollywood workers lined up at food banks just to survive. The machine that built American culture is breaking down in real time. In this video, I'm going to explain how the most dominant entertainment empire in history lost its grip on the world. We'll uncover why Hollywood rose faster than any industry before it, what gave it an unfair advantage that lasted nearly a century, and the hidden flaws that were always there, waiting to destroy it from within. But if you stick around until the end, I'll show you something that captures this entire story in one place. It's a location in Los Angeles that used to pulse with activity, where hundreds of people worked every single day. Today, it sits empty. When you see it, you'll understand exactly why Hollywood's collapse wasn't just inevitable. It was designed into the system from the very beginning. Let's go back to the early 1900s. Hollywood wasn't chosen by accident. It had two things that made it perfect for filmmaking: consistent sunshine and dirt-cheap land. While East Coast studios struggled with unpredictable weather and expensive real estate, California offered 300 days of perfect natural light and endless space to build massive sets. By the 1920s, Hollywood had captured 80% of the global box office. They weren't just making movies, they were printing money. But here's what made Hollywood truly unstoppable: they did the opposite of everyone else. While other industries separated production from distribution, Hollywood controlled everything. They owned the cameras, the studios, the actors, and the theaters where movies played. This vertical integration meant they controlled every dollar from the moment a script was written to the moment a ticket was sold. It was a monopoly disguised as entertainment. MGM bragged they had more stars than there are in heaven. They weren't exaggerating. Studios locked actors, directors, and writers into long-term contracts. You didn't work in film, you belonged to a studio. And if you wanted creative freedom? Too bad. Stars like Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and Douglas Fairbanks got so fed up with studio control that in 1919, they founded United Artists just to escape. Then came the moment that changed everything: the jazz singer in 1927. Sound cinema, talkies, transformed movies from silent curiosities into cultural phenomena. People were hungry for this. Hollywood had the infrastructure, the talent, and the technology to dominate this new era. They crushed European competitors who couldn't afford the expensive sound equipment. If you like my video, please subscribe my channel. The timing was perfect. America was experiencing unprecedented economic growth, and movies became the ultimate escapism during the Great Depression. While people struggled, Hollywood built palaces of fantasy. The cultural pain point was real. People needed hope, glamour, and distraction. Hollywood provided it better than anyone else could. Here's the engine that made Hollywood's growth exponential. Their business model was self-reinforcing in a way no other industry had achieved. First, the studio system created guaranteed distribution. When you owned the production company and the theaters, you didn't have to convince anyone to show your film. You just ordered it done. Block booking meant theaters had to buy packages of films. If they wanted the next big epic, they had to take 5 cheaper films too. This allowed even mediocre content to generate profit. Second, they leveraged star power like intellectual property. By controlling actors through contracts, studios could manufacture fame itself. They decided who became a star, built their image, and owned their earning potential. It was talent management as monopoly. Third, scale was cheap. Once you built the studio infrastructure, the marginal cost of each film dropped dramatically. Sound stages, costume departments, prop warehouses, these were fixed costs that spread across dozens of films per year. By the 1950s, studios were bankrolling lavish historical epics that no competitor could afford. Ben-Hur in 1959 cost $15 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's over $150 million today. It broke every box office record. Hollywood had discovered the blockbuster formula: spend big, market bigger, and dominate theaters for months. This allowed them to grow faster than anyone thought possible. For 50 years, if you wanted to make movies that mattered, you came to Hollywood. There was no alternative to by the mid-20th century. Hollywood wasn't just dominant, it was untouchable. Studios were sponsoring global premieres, launching careers, and shaping culture on every continent. Films were America's most successful export after weapons. The industry generated billions in revenue and employed hundreds of thousands of people. Cultural validation came from everywhere. Oscars became global events. Movie stars were the most famous people on Earth. Blockbusters like The Ten Commandments and Cleopatra weren't just films, they were cultural monuments. Media attention was constant. Every major newspaper had film critics. Every magazine featured Hollywood stars on covers. The global box office was Hollywood's playground. They produced nearly all of America's films and controlled distribution networks worldwide. When you walked into a theater in London, Paris, Tokyo, or Mumbai, you were probably watching a Hollywood film. The industry looked unstoppable because, for all practical purposes, it was. But there was always a problem lurking beneath the surface. It just wasn't obvious yet. The Supreme Court was watching. In 1948, United States versus Paramount Pictures delivered a devastating ruling. Studios could no longer own both production companies and theaters. The vertical integration that made Hollywood unstoppable was now illegal. Studios were forced to divest their theater chains and stop block booking. This worked for a while. Studios adapted. But it planted the seeds of something dangerous. Hollywood had built its empire on control, and that control was now breaking apart. Without guaranteed distribution, every film became a risk. The safety net was gone. Then television arrived. Suddenly, people could watch entertainment at home for free. Why pay for a movie ticket when you could watch Lucy and Desi in your living room? Suburbanization made it worse. Families moved away from city theaters and built their lives around home entertainment. And if you like my video, please subscribe my channel. But studios didn't see these as existential threats. They saw them as bumps in the road. The flaw was hidden because Hollywood was still making money. What they didn't realize was that their monopoly was the only thing protecting them from competition. Once that monopoly cracked, everything else would follow. Let's trace how one problem made the next one worse. The market shifted. By the 2000s, global cinema was fragmenting. China built its own film industry and imposed strict import limits on Hollywood films. Nollywood in Nigeria started producing more films than Hollywood annually. Bollywood dominated South Asia. Korean cinema exploded globally with films like Parasite and series like Squid Game. Hollywood's global market share started dropping, slowly at first, then faster. Competition intensified. For decades, Hollywood had no real competitors. Now, every major country wanted its own film industry. Tax incentives pulled production away from Los Angeles. Georgia offered 30% rebates. Marvel and major blockbusters moved there. Canada and New Mexico offered even more. Why shoot in expensive LA when you could save millions elsewhere? The streaming revolution destroyed the revenue model. DVDs used to generate billions in post-theatrical revenue. That disappeared almost overnight. Streaming platforms promised new revenue streams, but the math didn't work. Studios like Disney, Warner Brothers, and Paramount launched their own platforms, spending tens of billions on content to compete with Netflix. Streaming success didn't translate into profit. It translated into debt. Netflix's Ted Sarandos openly called traditional moviegoing outmoded. Streaming platforms released films simultaneously in theaters and at home, cannibalizing ticket sales. Why go to a theater when you can watch at home in 3 weeks? Or day and date for subscribers? Economics stopped working. Ticket prices rose 20% since 2019, but attendance dropped 30 to 40%. Fewer people were paying more for worse experiences. Global box office revenue fell 11.5% in 2024. Mid-budget films, the backbone of Hollywood's creative output, vanished. Studios became risk-averse, pouring money only into massive tentpole franchises. Smaller films couldn't get financing. Original stories disappeared. Creative stagnation set in. By the 2020s, 70% of top-grossing films were sequels, remakes, or franchise entries. Audiences were exhausted. Superhero films that once dominated now underperformed. Hollywood's obsession with safe IP decisions meant repetitive content. Star power evaporated. Social media diluted the mystique. Actors over 45 became the box office draws because younger stars couldn't build franchise-level fame anymore. Labor collapsed. The 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike was the longest in Hollywood history. Writers and actors walked out over streaming residuals and AI concerns. Production shut down for months. The industry lost billions. But even after strikes ended, work didn't return. Filming days in Los Angeles hit record lows in 2024. Only half of union members worked regularly. Visual effects companies closed offices. Reality TV production dropped 46% in LA. Each problem compounded the last. Fewer films meant fewer jobs. Fewer jobs meant workers left the industry. Workers leaving meant less infrastructure. Less infrastructure meant higher costs. Higher costs meant even fewer films. The spiral was accelerating. Then came the moment that made collapse inevitable. COVID-19 shut down global production in 2020. But that was just the spark. The real trigger was what happened afterward. Audiences didn't come back. Theaters reopened, but attendance never recovered. People had discovered they preferred streaming. The pandemic accelerated a trend that was already happening. It just compressed a decade of change into 18 months. At the same time, Donald Trump proposed 100% tariffs on films produced abroad. Hollywood stocks dropped. International governments set stricter import limits. Countries reduced U.S. film quotas to protect local industries. The global market that once buoyed Hollywood was now actively resisting it. And then the ultimate human error. Studios bet everything on streaming. They spent $120 billion combined annually on content, convinced they could recreate the theatrical model online. They couldn't. Streaming subscriptions prioritized long-tail content over big hits. The loss of residual payment structures devastated workers. Production costs skyrocketed while revenues stagnated. If you like my video, please subscribe my channel. This was the point where insiders quietly admitted the truth. Traditional Hollywood was done. The business model that worked for a century had broken. There was no fixing it, only adapting to whatever came next. The unraveling happened faster than anyone predicted. LA entertainment jobs dropped by 40,000 since 2022. Entire neighborhoods that serviced the industry, equipment rental houses, casting agencies, post-production studios, closed permanently. Workers didn't just lose jobs. They left Los Angeles entirely. Some moved to Atlanta or Albuquerque chasing production. Others left the industry completely. Small businesses collapsed. The restaurants that fed film crews, the hotels that housed visiting actors, the transportation services, all gone. LA County's scripted TV production dropped 27%. Freelancers who once thrived now relied on unemployment or food banks. Major studios laid off thousands. Disney cut 7,000 jobs. Warner Brothers Discovery slashed budgets. Paramount merged and restructured. The consolidation was brutal. Production numbers from major studios fell below 1990s levels despite having more distribution platforms than ever. Internationally, Hollywood's share evaporated. In India, superhero films once drove 50% of Hollywood's box office. By 2024, that dropped to 27%. In markets like Nigeria, local films consistently outgrossed Hollywood imports. Chinese domestic films pushed American movies to secondary status. The brand itself suffered. Hollywood had always represented prestige, quality, and cultural relevance. Now it represented stagnation, repetition, and corporate algorithm-driven content. Critics and fans alike voiced dissatisfaction. The mystique died. This wasn't a bankruptcy filing or a dramatic shutdown. It was a slow bleed. Fewer films, fewer jobs, fewer opportunities, less cultural impact. Hollywood didn't explode, it quietly deflated. Remember that location I mentioned at the beginning? The place that captures this entire story? It's a studio lot in Los Angeles. Not one of the famous ones you've heard of, those still operate barely. This is one of the mid-tier facilities that used to host TV productions, commercials, indie films. Walk through it today and you'll see empty sound stages, locked offices, equipment gathering dust. 5 years ago, this place employed 300 people daily. Actors, crews, writers, editors. Today, silence. The parking lot is empty. The security guard sits alone. The buildings are technically available for rent, but nobody's shooting here anymore. Production moved to Georgia, Canada, New Mexico, anywhere but LA. This single location symbolizes the entire collapse. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's ordinary. Hollywood's death isn't happening in headlines. It's happening in empty buildings like this one, scattered across Los Angeles. Facilities that once hummed with creative energy now sit vacant, waiting for a resurrection that isn't coming. The families who relied on this work? They've moved on. The artists who created here? They've adapted or quit. The industry that sustained this place? It's rebuilding itself elsewhere, in different forms, with different rules. The biggest lesson here is this. Monopolies make industries lazy, and when monopolies break, those industries die. Hollywood dominated for so long that it stopped innovating. It built a business model around control, controlling talent, distribution, and audiences. When technology and global competition shattered that control, Hollywood had no backup plan. They tried to rebuild the same monopoly with streaming, but you can't monopolize an infinite digital landscape the way you monopolized physical theaters. The second lesson is about adaptation. Hollywood refused to believe the world had changed. They assumed audiences would always come to theaters, always worship movie stars, always prioritize their content. They were wrong. Younger audiences prefer different formats. Global audiences want their own stories. The cultural monopoly dissolved because culture itself became decentralized. This ties back to the beginning. When you control 90% of something and drop to 70%, that's not a dip, that's the start of a collapse. The numbers don't lie. Hollywood's dominance was always temporary. They just believed their own myth that it was permanent. So here's my question for you. Was this inevitable, or could Hollywood have saved itself? If you were running a major studio in 2010, knowing everything that was coming, streaming, global competition, changing audience habits, what would you have done differently? Would you have embraced streaming earlier? Invested in diverse, original content instead of franchises? Fought harder to keep production in LA? Or was Hollywood always destined to fall the moment its monopoly ended? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you found this video valuable, subscribe, because the business of entertainment is still collapsing, and we're going to cover every brutal detail as it happens. If you like my video, please subscribe my channel.